Hello, everybody. It's Matt Anderson, and welcome to the Power of a Mastermind. I really appreciate you joining me for this session, and I'm excited to share what I've got. And what have I got? So what have I got is basically going to talk about a little bit about what masterminds are. They're becoming more and more popular nowadays. So why is that? And what's so great about why more and more people are becoming interested in them now when they were popularized or written about 80 years ago or more in Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich book. And how can you get the results that you're looking for from masterminds? And then towards the end, I'd like to just take a few minutes, and I've got a very special offer for this Impact Summit event that I'd like to talk through with you. And before I dive in, though, I do ask that you put your phones away, you turn on social media. It's kind of a waste of everybody's time, really, to just sort of half focus on this. Either this is going to be useful or it's not. So I really ask for your full attention, please. And then I also recommend that you take notes. There's no question that we always get significantly more from what we're trying to do when we write things down. So just a little bit on this first topic then about the background on masterminds. I'm including a picture of Andrew Carnegie because he was sort of one of the pioneers to this concept. And it's good. I think it's helpful to know a little bit about his background. I'm assuming you've heard of him. He was certainly a very famous American. And why? Because he was the richest American at the turn of the century in the 1900s. And interestingly, came from absolute, dirt poor background. Was, his family originally lived, shared a room with another family when he was in his early years when he was born in Scotland. And so it's kind of it ties in beautifully to sort of some of the rags to riches stories you've already heard tonight certainly from Ray, but they've alluded to other people that they've worked with that have had similar backgrounds. And his parents had to borrow money to get to the United States. And from the age of 12, he was working full time. The only chance he had to educate himself was on a Saturday night. So in other words, very, very, very humble origins. And yet, by the 1900s, he was the richest man in the United States. And what's fascinating then about this and why I'm talking about it is because he attributed, as I said on the screen, he attributed his entire fortune to the mastermind that he was in. This is a direct quote from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And the benefits that Carnegie got were really from introductions that he got from the other people that he mingled with in his mastermind. And in the Think and Grow Rich, they use the word psychic benefits, which sounds in this day and age a bit bizarre, but what they meant by that was multiple great minds coming together to ultimately come up with the synergy of ever better ideas. In other words, that 1 + 1 = 3, that sort of concept in terms of the energy of people coming up with ever better ideas. So that's kind of where all this started for not just for Carnegie as well. But then what happened was I don't know the exact year, but around 1910 or so, certainly around that time frame, Carnegie talked to Napoleon Hill about the idea of doing research on this and writing a book. And he recommended to Napoleon Hill that he focus on the 500 wealthiest people in the United States that were self-made millionaires, not just people that inherited money, but they'd made all the money for themselves. And it's a glowing array of names that many of you will have heard of, and I'm not going to go through many of them, but it did include the president, who did Woodrow Wilson, but also included the famous inventor Thomas Edison, the car genius Henry Ford. They attributed their wealth also to the masterminds that they'd been into, they'd been members of. And then the concept of the mastermind, clearly it's going to vary, but it's definitely a structured meeting. The purpose of it is to bring multiple people together where the goal is to help one another. So what's different in my mind, my experience with it is it feels like you're more of a team. It's less of where there's a leader necessarily. I mean, there's a facilitator often, but they're not dominating the whole proceedings. Or they're not if it's a true mastermind. It's really meant to be one where everybody is chipping in and helping out. And so it's a different spirit if it's run effectively. And in terms of how often you meet, well, obviously that's where you can start to make up your own rules. I mean, you could meet weekly. Some masterminds are one-off events, but I think the spirit of them, from where they started, is it's really something that meets consistently over a period of time. How often and for how long and where and how and all those types of things, I mean, that's entirely up to you. There's obviously this flexibility, but you get the sense. Now, obviously, you're watching this for a reason, and you're watching this because the concept of masterminds engages you. And so what is it that's drawn you to this topic? I mean, I presume, like for me, I know I was looking for a different format than the ones I'd experienced in the past, and I'll share a little bit about that, moving forward. But the first question for you is, obviously you're looking for one for a reason. So what? And let's be upfront about this. And what's holding you back from doing, and having what you really want in life? And my strongest suggestion would be that you write this down and start thinking it through. Is it lack of confidence? Is it lack of self-belief? Is it feeling like you don't have the skills you need to get where you want to go, or you don't know the right people, or that your current peer group is not higher level enough? What are those things? It's interesting. Earlier, Brian talked about one of our common fears is what we're afraid of what other people will think. We're afraid of failure, or for many of us, especially if we're not that young, is we've been punched on the nose in the past. We've had failures, and that often can scar us emotionally, so that we're reluctant to move forward. But what is it that you're looking for that you think is going to be best provided for in a mastermind group? So that's a very important thing to think about. Then to ask yourself the question, and I suppose, fine, this is I suppose it's a rhetorical question, but do you really want this problem to keep you from living your purpose in life? Because I think that the truth is even though, of course, everybody would say, no, of course I don't want this problem to keep me from living my true purpose. The reality is that for most people, we do, right? Most people don't end up really living their true calling, and so we do let barriers in their way. And so I guess that begs the logical question: is could a mastermind be the answer to help you meet that need and push you through that barrier that's presumably getting in your way? Because if you don't really want to break through, we do know that we are geniuses at coming up with great reasons, or great sounding reasons to us, to justify why we're not actually going to move forward. And it's quite scary, really, because on some levels it's almost a security blanket. So if you don't really want to break through, if you don't really want to smash this problem, your brain will be obligated to come up with excuses. And then lastly, I would say, is to remind you, and you've heard examples of this already so far in this event, other people have had, in all likelihood, very awfully similar problem to you. I mean, we like to think that we're unique with our problems, and that's not true. There are people out there that have had somewhat similar things, and very often worse things happen to them. So it's just starting to ingrain. And I know this is a rational argument, so it only has, in other words, it has its limits because it's stuck in your conscious brain. But it doesn't hurt to know and to hear stories from people who have done it before. And it's interesting that Ray Higdon talked about this earlier when he said there's this perception that, people that get to the top are superhuman, and that was the word he used. And that's the common problem that most of us have, is we see people that have more than us, and then we sit and justify and kind of come up with excuses about why they have something and we don't. And that's all they are. That, when you actually, what's great about hearing these people talk, and when you actually can meet them in person, then you can actually realize this is just another person, and they have plenty of flaws and problems. However, they have, figured out how to succeed in certain areas. And that's something I've focused on a lot in recent months for myself with a podcast that I've been hosting, that opportunity to kind of get much more first face-to-face experience with people to sort of see that, which is helpful. I'd certainly recommend considering that as something else. So where does that bring me? In other words, why should you be listening to me talk about Mastermind? So just a brief piece about my background, and I decided to tell it mostly with pictures, although you can see me on screen as well. So this was a slide that I used 7 years ago when I did presentations, PowerPoints and webinars and so on, that told my story. And at that time, things were going very well. I'd been self-employed for 10 years. 10 years prior, in 2002, I'd been a school teacher making $29,000 a year. 10 years later, I was on a healthy six-figure income. I was traveling the world. I spoke on 3 different continents. I trained sales teams from over 35 countries. And again, this is sort of a little bit of a bio that you're looking at right now on the screen. I had a best-selling business book that came out at the beginning of 2012. So things were very good. And of course, pictures don't always tell the whole story. I was starting to burn out, I think, at that time. And I know I was. So, and I was getting, so frustration was building. So as I tell this story, I mean, it wasn't an overnight shift, because it certainly looks like it when you see the pictures, because come 2013, January 2013, I got married later in life, and my wife and I found out we were expecting in January. And it's actually, it scares me no end when I look at this picture. This was a week after we'd learned that we were expecting, and you can, I don't know how clearly you can see on your screen, but I've already got a big whacking cold sore on my upper lip, and I look like I've been diagnosed with cancer. I mean, I just looked somewhat emaciated, which of course didn't happen in a week, but I looked dreadful, and I was shocked when I saw this picture. But it is a reflection of what was starting to go on inside of me when this happened, and it's unfair to just attribute it all to the knowing we had children coming, because I was already, I mean, the frustration of coaching, and no exaggeration, hundreds and hundreds of salespeople over a 10-year period had cumulatively been building up in terms of the frustration. And of course, some people got great results. I wouldn't have had the success I did if people didn't, but far too many, their outcomes were underwhelming and disappointing, and my frustration was growing and growing at the number of people that weren't following through. It was driving me crazy. And also, I think there was the fact that it was all sales related, which wasn't my deepest passion. I mean, I think it was a combination of things. In the real world, it's the way it works. But that picture doesn't lie in terms of how I was feeling. And it started a nosedive. So the children came along. We had twins. And it, it should have been a joyous occasion. It was for a short period, but I was just doing an awful job on my head. And it's no exaggeration. I mean, I was really struggling. I had zero fun. This was a trip to Florida we made when they were almost one. I was literally struggling to keep heads above water. I was not in a good place. And that picture does say it all. I mean, it's funny. I went, as I prepared for this presentation, I went back through a lot of old pictures, which I've not done in all these years. I've not wanted to go back to these pictures because they just didn't have any warm feelings for me, which is sad to say, very, very sad to say, actually. It's really sad for me. But I mean, that picture tells it all in terms of how I was feeling at the time. I just was not in a good place. And, and I want to spell it out for you. I mean, the number of different things that were going on. I mean, things were horrible at home between me and my wife. We had just horrendous rows and arguments. I was so stressed that first year that I took up CrossFit, and I was going 5 times a week. So I was 47 years old, lifting far too heavy weights with not the greatest supervision on my technique. I ended up damaging my back so badly, I actually couldn't move. I mean, I was physically in excruciating, this is no exaggeration. I mean, I could not move. December of 2014, I ended up having to have a surgery on my back. I mean, it was just an invariably awful time. And I, shortly after that, or a couple of months after that, not even actually, I started another business. And that, went downhill very quickly. And while I don't know, $80,000 in debt, I guess it's all relative, right? But for me, that was a huge amount of money. And I talked to bankruptcy attorneys, and so it was a horrible time, and it was not getting any better. I mean, you can read some of the things on here. I don't need to, go through all of it. But a lot of things that I'd not dealt with from my past, I think, were showing themselves. I just wasn't aware. I wasn't able to tune into any of it. So I was in a horrible place. And unfortunately, it didn't get any better the next year. This is a picture. I know I feel bad because the pictures keep being of my son when I've also got 2 children. But that was the twins' birthday party. And as you can see, that's, this wasn't an anomaly of a picture that I took. I mean, I had a frown on my face that day. The following year, unfortunately, wasn't any better either. So it was really a very long period where I was stuck, and I really had no idea. I just didn't know how to get out of it, quite frankly. And the turning point, was yet to come. And so cumulatively, I decided to sort of tally up all the things I'd done to try to grow and figure out things for myself. And this was the best that and it was a lot of things. I had multiple coaches that tallied a good $25,000, I'm quite sure. I mean, I've got a huge, huge library of books. I'm always reading books or listening to books. I've been on many different seminars. I traveled great distances for some of them, year-long workshops, year-long leadership courses. I mean, I even remember talking to Stephen Covey on one occasion via a microphone at an event where he was speaking, because he was talking about Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist that was in the concentration camps, and how, you know, kind he'd been and loving he'd been, and how he was able to be that person under the worst of circumstances. And I read his book. I've been reading his books for almost 20 years by then, and I was so frustrated because I couldn't relate to the story. And I said, look, I've come from a fairly middle class background. You know, I don't have anything like this I can relate to. So, you know, how does that help me? You know, and of course, again, I think he was trying to tell the story that if he can do it, I can do it, you can do it. But it was too extreme for me to be able to relate to. Now, I will say it was a very powerful moment, because I'll never forget, he looked me in the eye, glared into my eyeballs and said something to the effect of, you know, you are totally capable of doing anything you want in life if you really believe what you're doing. And I do honestly remember getting sort of chills down my spine when he said that. And what's really sad is I wanted that somehow to stick and to change my life. But that wasn't enough. It's none of this, all this money, all these things I did, there is no embellishment here. I tried many, many things, and I was just not in a good place. So what is it about masterminds, or what are the secrets to masterminds that are going to provide you with, in all likelihood, some very favorable outcomes? One of them is you already have what you need. In other words, everything that you need to succeed is within you. You have that capacity, that ability. You know, certainly many things can be developed, but it's all there. You know, we don't come up with goals that we're not capable of accomplishing, or that are so far-fetched that, you know, we're being foolish. In other words, I'm not going to play rugby for England. I'm not going to be a professional opera singer. I don't set those goals, and neither do you, right? So you already have much of what you need is there. It's about bringing it out. Second thing that I love about masterminds is that, I mentioned this earlier, is it does feel more like you're on a team. Even if you're working towards different things, you are all achiever types that have goals, and you don't want to show up to a meeting and let that team down. So there's, you know, some people choose to get involved with it because they know that it's going to be good for them to stick their necks out a little bit, because they need that extra nudge of, I don't want to look badly in front of people that are also up to some exciting things. And then the third thing that's great about it, if it's a consistent meeting that you're having, is that breakthrough that you're looking for stays top of mind, which is a massive deal. You know, that consistency that came up earlier from both Ray and Brian, that we all need. It helps when you've got those consistent meetings coming up. So it's, you know, because you're thinking about it more, so therefore you work on it more. So those are three sort of secrets as to why masterminds can be effective. Who do they work for? It's a long list. I mean, you can read this list yourself, but really, whether you're in network marketing or real estate or sales, consulting, I mean, there aren't many areas that this isn't going to work for you. I mean, if you're up to something, it doesn't really matter where you are, it's where you're going, and putting yourself in that environment is going to help you get there. Now, what started to turn things around for me was in the middle of 2018, maybe a little earlier than that, spring of 2018, a former client of mine who'd become quite a good friend was in town, and we had dinner. And it was funny because he asked me a question that I used to ask a lot of clients, and I used to ask myself consistently, but that was before I sort of hit my slump. And that was the question, you know, he said, Matt, you know, question you used to ask me that made a big difference, you know, is what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And it wasn't hard for me to come up with an answer to that. I mean, I said, well, I would help people follow through on a much bigger scale and much more consistently, because those are the sticking points. People, they might take some action, but they don't do it consistently to get those results. And taking that big leap of making some kind of breakthrough through a self-imposed ceiling, that's what's missing for most people. So that got me engaged and got me thinking. And that was a good thing. And so then while this picture, yes, is flippant, I did then start looking into this concept of, well, what do masterminds do? Because I'd done everything else, well, it felt like I had. Maybe I didn't do it all very well, but I'd certainly done plenty of it. You know, what do the elites do? And when they get together and they're paying, and these aren't, I'm not making these numbers up. I mean, the elite masterminds that people will pay $100,000 a year to be in. What do they talk about? What's the structure? What's the content? What tools and strategies do they use? That's what I started looking into. So while these two pictures are flippant, sort of, I mean, they're real pictures from 2018 that I think started to show that I was coming to life again anyway. I did, yes, spend lots of time in the library. And I did a lot of work. I mean, I started cutting back quite quickly on my old business so that I could focus on what I could sense I knew was much more my real passion and calling in life. Demonstrated, things started to pick up in my head, business trip in England last year. And then finally a happy picture of me at one of my children's birthday party from last year, a year ago. Things were picking up, which was great. But then things got worse. So that was from Christmas last year. And, you can see the expression on my wife's face. And some of that was me and some of that was the charming relationship she doesn't have with my mother. But nonetheless, things were, difficult. And I just remember waking up on New Year's Day at an all-time low. And it's funny, there's a theme to, you heard some of these stories earlier, certainly from Ray and Brian, that, and I've found this out from doing my podcast interviews, is that some people absolutely do have a certain day where they hit an all-time low. Admittedly, they may have had others, and usually it's leading up, like there've been other things that culminate. It doesn't certainly ever come out of nowhere. But for me, I was, I don't know how the best word, but my breath was taken away from me. Like I just couldn't, I was gutted at how miserable I felt on the first day of the year, given that normally is a year for so much hope, even if it doesn't often last very long for many people. I just couldn't believe how down I was feeling. So that was a real turn, that was certainly another turning point for me, where I didn't want to spiral any further. And so I got into lots of action. Ray certainly talked about this a lot earlier as well. And my first sign of hope was I did early this year decide I was going to start doing a podcast. And so that's me. Presumably, I think I was about to record my first one. And so that was, a turnaround that I was starting to do something new, starting to learn from people. And very early on, one of my first guests mentioned masterminds. And it was interesting because I don't know, it was on my mind because the minute she mentioned it, the first thought in my head is the minute this podcast is over, I want to talk to her about a mastermind. So it was sort of, again, like I said, I've been looking into it, and there's a quote from Napoleon Hill on masterminds: "This form of cooperative alliance has formed the basis of nearly every great fortune." And he studied, as I said, hundreds, 500 of the wealthiest self-made people in the United States over a period of 3 decades. And there's extensive research. So, we'd be fools, absolute fools, to ignore something like this. So what we did, this other person's name was Susan, we put this together. I sent this out, but, she helped me with the wording, but we sent this out sort of as a help wanted to a number of people. The focus of the group is helping each other grow. So this is the exact wording we use: grow a passion, project, or business by leveraging others for ideas, accountability, and resources and contacts who are this type of person. High vibrational energy, Brian Del Masso talked about this earlier, achiever types, and focused first on helping others in life. So those were our criteria. And it was encouraging. Early on, definitely got some strong early interest. Absolutely count me in. So the executive of a nonprofit. Someone else, actually, this was my second group, but, again, lots of early interest, was very excited. Dave. And then the feedback very early on was great. Thanks to everyone. This was very, very good. Really appreciate the honesty to all of you. And I have already learned quite a good bunch from you. Feel very humbled to be part of this. That was encouraging. Here's another one. Thanks for the great call. I'm impressed and really appreciate the authenticity as well as the support. This is going to be a great second half of the year. Truly humbled and excited at the same time. So that was fantastic. And then 4 people dropped out for my first group. And I really struggled with this. And again, the short version, I think, is that what I learned from this type of group is that it's confronting, to actually put yourself forward to say, okay, I'm going to face my biggest challenge and work on it and continue to make progress on it. It is I don't want to say it's scary, except I think it probably is for most of us. I suppose it is. It is for most of us. I can't speak for everybody. But based on what I've seen is, I use the word confronting. I mean, I think it just forces the issue. Now, what's disconcerting is that most people, I don't think, are willing to admit that it's confronting. What they say is, oh, I'm too busy. I'm sorry, it's too much. They don't say, I can't handle this, So that's the unfortunate part. But I think I'm sharing this so that you're prepared for it. But the good news is, well may you ask, so what does work about the mastermind? Because there's an awful lot of things. And so the first one for me, absolutely, was the vulnerability. I mean, I was absolutely blown away by this. Now, I admit that I certainly set the stage because I told them some of the things I've already shared with you, or perhaps maybe went into more detail. But I was most humbled when one of the participants talked about how he had recently lost the love of his life through divorce. For the second time, that he had multiple sclerosis that he was battling with, and that there were days when he couldn't see properly. To admit this in a first meeting was amazing to me. Somebody else talked about childhood sexual trauma that she'd had, and then someone else talked about a very repressive father that she'd had who didn't let her have any friends growing up. She wasn't allowed to go out to be with friends. So now, because the cynic might be saying, well, it sounds like a therapy session, but no, on the contrary, this was just about being vulnerable, opening up to say, the only way I'm going to get something really profound from this is if I'm really open with people and tell them what my real life looks like. And obviously these are people who have also achieved great success in other areas. And that's what you're looking for. But that really affected me. And then in the third meeting with my first group, what I noticed the most was other people stepping up to really point out the things that we just don't see about ourselves. There is this big piece of our lives where, you don't know what you don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And if someone else doesn't point it out, I could easily go through my whole life and not know. And so I was this was the third meeting for my first group. And I've been talking about some, financial frustrations I had. And then I talked about my purpose in life, which was part of what we were discussing. And without going into masses of detail, making the story too detailed, I talked about this part of my childhood where I'd felt like a caged bird. And the, a big part of it for me was feeling free to be who I wanted to be in life. And one of the participants saying to me, but Matt, what you've just described in terms of how you're behaving sounds to me like you're still acting like a caged bird. And, well, that really hit me. And it was because it hit me more afterwards, I think, than at the time, as I realized that she'd hit the nail on the head. But it's something that, again, we don't see these things. It's too hard for us to notice that sort of thing. So that, for me, is really invaluable. And it led to an epiphany for me that this type of environment can cause breakthroughs. I mean, we can have legitimate breakthroughs when you've got that kind of discussion going on and people willing to step up and point those types of things out. And then the third thing for me that was so powerful was, ultimately, I think one of the main reasons, certainly Brian Damaso accurately talks about how it's our subconscious mind that's perhaps our biggest hurdle or handicap, because it's hardwired us to act in a certain way unwittingly. Having said that, there's plenty of evidence also that talks about our lack of worthiness and how, too often we feel like we don't really deserve to be, do, and have what we most want in life, and talk ourselves therefore out of taking action on it. And so I think it's crucial then that, for me, the masterminds that I'm creating, like I said, there's the quote here on your screen is from a book by Greg Bayer called Real Love. The process of feeling love begins with telling the truth about ourselves to people who are capable of accepting and loving us. And that's my goal in my masterminds, is to have that type of environment, because I think that, many of us perhaps don't feel or don't have that internalized love. We grew up conditionally loved by parents, and then we're in relationships with people that were equally conditionally loved. And so they behave the same, they behave that way as well. And And it's the power of having this kind of environment that can make it safer and that can make people be more willing to take risks and open up, that can then help them, support them to get the breakthroughs that they need. In other words, we've got to get that love from somewhere. And if that feeling can come from people in the group, then that's fantastic. Which led to another epiphany for me, which is different than what I've just described. It's just this realization too that your biggest challenge, it's very, very likely that there's other people in your group that have figured that one out. They've surpassed that one. Rather like watching the people tonight present, they've overcome certain boundaries that maybe we haven't yet, or you haven't yet. And what's great in the group is that it works both ways. There's things that you do, you've actually done a good job with in your life, and that's really the obstacle area for someone else in the group. Whereas for you, it might be something different. So, but it's wonderful to be in a room of people where there are other people there who have aced what you need to ace, because it makes it harder for you to keep giving yourself excuses and reasons as to why you can't do it, when literally staring you in the face are other people that you realize are no harder working than you, no more intelligent than you, and so on and so forth. Obstacles that people have. So Mark was someone who was reluctant to get into the mastermind. He said he was too busy, he said he couldn't afford it. Luckily, he did take the leap of faith. And it was wonderful because in the first meeting that he was in, there was someone else in the group who's a billionaire, and he was looking for better contacts for his own business, and she offered to make some introductions for him. And so in the very first meeting, she's opening some fantastic doors to him that, again, is I've never seen that happen in any other environment that I've been in. Obviously, there's networking groups that are designed to do that kind of thing. But at this level, never seen it before. Other things that can be of benefit. So best practices. So, people talk often about, I don't have the time to be in a mastermind group. But if you're in again, the strategies I've learned anyway, some of them will save you time. We forget that people who are making 10, 100 times more than we are have just the same number of hours in the day. And yet we talk about how busy we are. In fact, Brian Carruthers talked about this earlier. He said how it used to be this badge of honor to talk about how busy you are. Well, I think it still is. But it's not about being busy, right? It's about how you use your time. And so my point is that people say they're too busy, but there's so many ways that I'm quite sure almost all of them could be far more effective. Plus, they're not breaking through where they really want to be. They're not that happy, or they're not living their calling. So there's things that aren't happening, and yet we're saying we're too busy, and we're taking stuff on that's not getting us to where we want to go. I was impressed with something that was impressed upon me not too long ago was a quote from Warren Buffett, where he made the observation the difference between successful and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. So, and again, that's not a strategy. Well, actually, it is a strategy, but anyway, my point is these are some of the things that that I certainly work with in my mastermind groups that can make it easier to make that commitment. And then this is something that certainly Brian Del Masso's work with Bob Proctor does a fantastic job with, and it's certainly one of the keys that has to be addressed is that gap between what we know and then what we actually do. Because once you can start to work on that effectively, that too will save you time, and it will make you money if that's what is important to you. So that's part of my masterminds anyway. Other people's resources. So for example, there's a head of sales for a luxury travel company in one of my masterminds. He was doling out some fantastic suggestions for someone who's actually also extremely successful in sales and was building his own bigger sales team. So there's all kinds of things that you can benefit from that other people bring to the table. That's what I love about it. So in other words, it's not just, for example, in my instance, it's not just what I bring to the table for content. Everybody has got some good stuff to contribute besides just the coaching, the ideas that they might have, or them spotting blind spots. So that's a factor. And then another thing that you tend not to think about, it's another great benefit, learning from other people's mistakes and also their epiphanies. So I know one of the last meetings I had in July with one of my mastermind groups, there was a chap in it called Michael, who at the end said that the most useful thing he got from the meeting was somebody else's epiphany. And that related to managing teams, because he'd come from corporate. He was now running his own company, and he didn't like managing people that much. That was a turn-off. He got a bad taste in his mouth from his corporate days. but he'd let that influence how he was, I guess, stuck in his own business, really, or growing his own business, because he didn't want to do that much with his own company. So again, but it was learning from someone else's epiphany that was really valuable to him. And while this didn't happen in a mastermind, it certainly changed my life. That particular example, I was in a seminar 10 years ago, just sitting in my chair listening, and someone stepped up to the microphone to share what they had learned. And they started talking about how when they were 18 years old, they'd had their heart broken in a relationship, and as a result had not wanted to take the risk of giving themselves in a loving relationship again, and had promptly then therefore been a commitment phobe. And I'll never forget sitting in my chair thinking, oh my God, that's exactly what happened to me. And this was 10 years ago. And, I'm putting up this picture of my wife and family because these three people would not be in my life. We wouldn't have had these children had I not had that epiphany. And this is not an exaggeration. This is a true story, because then what happened almost immediately after that is I started getting out there, but with a different attitude towards dating, because I realized, I truly, honestly, I remember feeling like this ghost was being exorcised out of me. And I truly remember feeling that as I sat there. It was a remarkable epiphany. But my point is, well, of course, you can't promise these things are going to happen. People are going to have epiphanies because of the nature of this environment, and hopefully you're one of them. But it's the kind of thing that's infinitely more likely to happen when things are put together effectively. Another great example. So Susan, she was the person that mentioned her desire to be in one. And yes, we moved forward with it. And she was still saying to me, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. I'm not sure this is the right time. My confidence is shaky about this one, because she was aware this is going to force me to confront some demons. And she knew that the accountability would be good for her, because if she didn't put herself out there to do that, it would be way too easy to stay in that comfort zone that she was in. So, as I say here, it's not as much of a knowledge issue for most of us. I mean, most of us can find out what to do. It's the doing part that we're not doing. And so, accountability in this environment can be very effective in a way that doesn't have to feel humiliating. But at the same time, we still don't want to look like a fool in front of other people. Throw in the coaching benefits. So at the second mastermind meeting that I had with my first group, I remember one of the participants was struggling with a book that she wants to write. And it's not a short story, but the short version of the story is another participant in the group asked this woman, he said, can I ask you, do you love yourself? And I remember thinking, wow, I would never ask someone that. But I was impressed. Well, I was initially concerned, because I thought, wow, that's a really direct and personal question. But she received it so well, because that was the crux of the matter, and it was brilliant coaching, and it's exactly what needed to be discussed. So again, it's this benefit you get from other people that are contributing. The support factor. So here's a screenshot from quite recently with one of my groups, and it's just one screen, or it went on for at least 2 or 3 screens, but where I popped out a weekly question, which said, what's at least 4% outside your comfort zone this week? And it created this fantastic chain of different things people in the group had done, and accomplishments, and then also encouragement that they had also from one another. And it was really fantastic to see, to be a part of that. So that's, again, it's a different dynamic, that this is the way, to me, it should be. In other words, it doesn't feel, it's not something that's fake, it's just sort of blasts on social media. I mean, this is a specific group that's only for these people in the mastermind, and it was really wonderful to see them cheering each other on. And so, Susan had all these doubts, but then just over a month ago posted on Facebook how, much of her putting herself out there in terms of talking more about some of her past, came because of a challenge from the mastermind group that we put together. And she said, I challenge others with their thinking. I was ready. Thanks, Matt, for putting together the mastermind group. We all grow exponentially because of the blending of the chemistry of all of our minds. Exciting. But it's cool that she didn't drop out, but she's excited to keep growing. So If you don't mind, I'd like to take 5 minutes. I'd like to make a special offer to you for watching this, for this event that's specific to this Impact Summit. So if that's okay with everybody, I would like to do that right now, because there's a lot more I know I can give that I can't possibly cover in the space of a short webinar. And so this first thing that I'd like to offer, there's multiple things I want to offer to you. The primary piece is the mastermind itself. So if you're interested in the mastermind, it's a $5,000, that alone is $5,000. And it's 12 monthly meetings. They're 2 hours. They're done virtually. And again, all the kinds of benefits that you can focus on. What is that one big thing, that one big area that you're just not breaking through? And it would really benefit to be in this kind of environment. That's the thing to think about. So there's the mastermind itself. There's also an online course, and it's a very detailed online course. In fact, it's a lot more detailed than the mastermind, really, because there's a lot more videos and content that beautifully complements and supplements what's covered in the mastermind. It also reinforces some of the things in the mastermind that, obviously you're not going to remember everything in every 2-hour meeting. So that's 50 videos. That's a $12.97 value if you were to invest in that course. So that's also part of my offer. And in addition, there's a live event that I'll be doing in Chicago next May 2020. It's also pretty likely, it's highly likely I'll also do one in the UK, probably around the same time. But that's a Get Out of Your Own Way live. There'll be international speakers. There'll also be, again, if you think about these things, who shows up to this stuff, or other high achievers that want more from life. So great networking as well. That's a $1,000 value. And then there's also an exclusive Facebook group that's only for people that have made the commitment to be in a mastermind. So again, extremely motivated people who really are going places that you definitely want in your network, and not such a crazy large group of people either that you can't possibly make connections with any of them. High vibrational types, achiever types, focused first on helping others. That may be the most underpriced piece at $497, but it all adds up to a total value of almost $8,000 of the package that I'm offering to you for this event. And frankly, if all you got from your mastermind was an environment for 12 months, you were expected by everyone to break through your biggest limiting barrier because others in your group already had, would that be worth $8,000? If all you got from your mastermind was an environment where others were constantly looking out for your blind spots, things that, again, it's no exaggeration to say many of us, including you, you could go through your whole life and never have that thing pointed out. And that's why top achievers, top athletes, that's why they have coaches, is to help them with those things, is we can't possibly see all these things about ourselves. So to have that kind of environment, even for a year, what a difference that could make to your progress over the years. Would that be worth $8,000? If all this mastermind did was give you ongoing specific things to do and support that helps you build that internal worthiness, that internal love, that knowledge that you are loved, so that you feel good enough about yourself to believe that you do deserve, that you're just as good as anybody else, and there's no reason why if this person can have it, if Ray and Brian can have it, why can't you? Are they better than you, really? That takes time, and that takes quite a lot of time for many of us to instill, to build up. It's awfully nice to have a support group, and it's more than a support group, but to have that group that's cheering you on and helping you, because they're going to have downers. In other words, everybody's going to struggle in this group at times, because if they're not, then they're not doing it right. They're not getting outside their comfort zone. They're not doing it right. So everyone's going to hit those bumps. And the whole point to it is that we continue to be there for one another in multiple different ways. So would that be worth $8,000 to you? So in other words, what is a year's worth of a mastermind worth for you? If you had one breakthrough that actually lasted, not just something that, maybe stuck for a short period, would that be worth $10,000 every month to you if it was business related? Would it be worth $50,000 a year? How much would you pay to get a legitimate breakthrough in an area that you've not broken through? So, I hope you can see that for less than $8,000, this is a great deal. Normally, in fact, I had email correspondence today with some people. This is a $5,000 investment, typically outside the event. But because I want you to smash through your ceiling, and because you're watching this now, you've gone out on a limb to watch this and learn more from some other great minds. My offer for you is that for less than $4,000, for $3,997, you can start this today. You can do it in 4 payments if that works better for you. This offer is valid for a month past the original date of this presentation, August the 19th, August the 20th, but basically a month. And there's a guarantee that I'll give you too. Now, my guarantee is marginally different. It is a 30-day guarantee, but I don't want you to just put your toe in the water, because I don't want too many people like those 4 people that said they'd try it, and then bailed. And I don't mean that derisively. I mean, I've had more than my share of struggles of facing fears. But the way I work it is, is I want you to show up to, you got to give it at least a couple of meetings. You got to do some work and give this some proper effort, because obviously if you do, great things are going to happen. But anyway, my point is there's a guarantee on this, but it's in month 2 that you can get all your money back if you want to. That's no questions asked. And here's what you're going to get. You're going to get 12 monthly meetings with the Mastermind group, and it's more than monthly, right? There's weekly interaction, there's coaching, individual bits of coaching from me here and there, more than here and there. There's the online course, the How to Get Out of Your Own Way course. There's the live event, and there's the Facebook community. So the total value is almost $8,000. If you're interested in taking the big leap, pop me an email, matt.anderson.intl, short for international, @gmail.com, matt.anderson.intl@gmail.com. Others have done it. You can too, just like the other people you saw present tonight. Michael runs a software company. He comments, he's been able to overcome long-standing obstacles that were difficult to take on by myself. Susan, the person that I started the first group with, says, thanks, I feel really humbled. What else did she say? I know new results will come from vicarious learning from others. So there's been a huge shift for me on several different fronts. Asvin is a past client of mine. He got amazing results in sales. He had the best year of his career. And has gone on to have ever better years since. Claire was a client of mine. She too had a best ever year, and she too has gone on to have ever better years. Jason is an entrepreneur, runs a podcasting company, amongst others. Comments that the Mastermind group allows you to see your obstacles from a different perspective, which helps, and that's part of it, right? Different perspective, paradigm, which helps you get to the root of the problem and creates an environment that often leads to a simple and easy solution. I highly recommend Matt Anderson's Mastermind. So Jason's in my very first group, actually. Remember, the sum total of the top 5 people you spend time with. So elevate. It is in fact, essentially, so many people I've interviewed for my podcast, which by the way is called The Road Not Taken. So many of them have talked about how their peer group had to be elevated, how they had to surround themselves with ever better, I hate the word better, but ever people that were, further ahead than they were, that they could learn from and grow with. And otherwise, you tend to mimic the people that you surround yourself with. That's human nature. So it's wonderful to have the support group and to have it consistently as well. And where there's an expectation that you're going to be talking about what you've done. You can't sort of just hide at the back, as I had in some of my experiences with seminar programs that were more than one-offs. So you can get started today. It's just $39.97, or there's the 4 payment option. You've got a month to make the decision, or to take advantage of that specific offer. And that's my email. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me, matt.anderson.intl@gmail.com. And with that, I would like to thank you. I hope you got some good ideas on Masterminds that you can take with you for this. Otherwise, I look forward to hearing from you. Best of luck to you. And I hope you've gotten a lot from this, and then also from the other presenters. Thanks very much.